I signed the final closing papers at 10:15 a.m., and by 10:20 a.m., the money was moving into an account my husband, Silas, didn't know existed. I didn't feel guilty when the notary stamped the last page because 3 nights ago, Silas had stood in front of my parents and hit me 7 times while the room stayed silent. Now he was at his law firm thinking he still had a home to come back to, but the locks were being changed in 20 minutes. Everyone in my family told me to keep the peace for the sake of the family name. They saw what he did, they heard the sound of his hand hitting my face, and then they sat down for dinner like nothing happened. They think I should be a good wife and forgive him. Is a family's reputation worth more than a daughter's safety? I decided that if Silas wants to act like a king who can do no wrong, he can go find a new castle to rule. I sold the house for 20% under market value just to make sure the deal closed in 48 hours. Then my phone buzzed. It wasn't Silas, it was my mother. She told me she was heading over to our house to help me pack because she assumed I was moving into the guest room of her estate to hide. She had no idea there wouldn't be a house for me to hide in. I told her I wasn't home, but she said she was already in the driveway and saw a van parked there. My heart hammered against my ribs. The van wasn't mine. It belonged to the new owners. They were early. I had to get there before my mother realized that the man carrying a box out of the front door wasn't a mover I hired, but the person who now legally owned our lives. I sped through the suburban streets, my hands tight on the steering wheel. If she saw the sold sign being hammered into the lawn, she would call Silas immediately. When I pulled up, the new owner, a man named Miller, was holding a crowbar. He looked at me, then at my mother's car. He didn't know the situation, he just knew he paid cash for a house that was supposed to be empty. My mother stepped out of her SUV, her face pale, looking at the sold sign lying in the grass. Deirdre, what did you do? Just then, a black luxury sedan pulled into the driveway behind her. It was Silas. He was home 4 hours early. As Silas stepped out of the car, he didn't look at me first. He looked at Miller, who was currently carrying Silas's favorite flat-screen TV toward the moving van. Silas didn't yell. He reached into his jacket. My breath caught. I thought he was reaching for a weapon. Instead, he pulled out a folded legal document and handed it to my mother. He hadn't come home because he was suspicious. He had come home because he had already filed for a mental competency hearing against me an hour before I sold the house. If Silas could prove I wasn't sane when I signed those closing papers, the sale would be void. My mother took the paper, her eyes scanning it quickly. She didn't look horrified. She looked relieved. She looked at Silas and nodded. They had been working together. My own mother had helped Silas prepare the paperwork to lock me away in a private facility the moment I tried to leave him. Silas finally looked at me. His face was calm, which was always scarier than when he was angry. "Deirdre," he said, his voice smooth, "you look tired. You've been doing so much lately. Why don't you let us take you to the doctor?" He took a step toward me, and I realized there were 2 other men in the back of his black sedan. They weren't lawyers. They were private security. I was trapped in my own driveway. I backed away toward Miller, the new owner. "This man owns the house now," I shouted. Miller looked confused, holding the TV like a shield. Silas laughed, a short, dry sound. He told Miller that the sale was fraudulent because I was under medical distress. He offered Miller an extra $10,000 cash right there to just put the TV back and leave. Miller looked at me, then at the thick stack of $100 bills Silas pulled from his pocket. Miller took the money. He didn't even look me in the eye. He signaled his movers to start putting everything back inside. My only witness, the man who was supposed to be my ticket out, had just been bought. I turned to my mother, hoping for a spark of humanity, but she was busy deleting the call history on my phone, which she had snatched from the porch table. But Silas made one mistake. He assumed I sold the house to a stranger. What he didn't know was that Miller wasn't just a random buyer. I had met Miller weeks ago at a support group for people dealing with high-profile estates. Miller was a private investigator I had hired to act as a buyer. The sale was a setup to get Silas to admit to his financial crimes on camera. Miller reached into his vest and pulled out a blinking recording device. "We got the bribery on tape, Silas," Miller said, his voice changing from a gruff mover to a professional investigator. Silas froze. His face turned a deep shade of red. But then he smiled. "That's fine," Silas whispered. "But you forgot one thing. Look at the roof." He pointed to the 360-degree security cameras he had installed the day after he hit me. He had recorded me practicing my confession, making me look like a liar. My mother stepped forward and handed Silas a small vial she had taken from my bathroom. It was a prescription I had never seen before. They were setting the stage to prove I was self-medicating. As the private security guard stepped out of the car to grab my arms, a loud siren echoed through the neighborhood. But it wasn't the police. Smoke started billowing out of the second-story window. I had left the gas stove on and a pile of Silas's illegal files right next to the burner. The security guards lunged for me, but the heat from the front door was becoming intense. Silas screamed at the guards to let me go and saved the server room in the basement instead. He realized that if his digital records burned, his law firm would be investigated for every penny they had hidden from the IRS. While they ran inside, I didn't run for the gate. I ran for Silas's car. The keys were still in the ignition. My mother tried to block my path. She grabbed the car door, but I shifted into reverse. The force knocked her expensive handbag to the ground, spilling dozens of identical vials of the medication she claimed was mine. As I sped out of the driveway, I saw Silas through the rearview mirror. He wasn't panicked. He picked up his phone and made a single call. Suddenly, the engine of the luxury sedan began to sputter and die. He had used a remote kill switch. I rolled to a stop just 2 blocks away. I jumped out and started running through the suburban backyards. I could hear the sirens getting louder. I looked down and realized I was still holding the one thing Silas would kill for, the burner phone he used to coordinate the hush money payments to my parents. I opened it and found a text to my father. "She's at the car. Do it now." I peered through a hedge and saw my father's silver SUV stop next to the stalled sedan. He didn't look for me. He got out with a gas can. He wasn't there to help. He was there to set the car on fire, to destroy the evidence of the tampering. My own father was cleaning up Silas's mess, even if it meant I was caught in the crossfire. I realized the moral trap wasn't about money. It was about a hit and run my father committed 30 years ago that Silas was using for blackmail. My father struck a match. We made eye contact through the hedge. For a second, I saw the man who used to read me bedtime stories. Then his face went cold. He threw the match into the car. As the flames erupted, he pointed toward my hiding spot and shouted to the police, "There she is! She's trying to burn the evidence!" He was framing his own daughter to save his skin. The police tackled me to the ground. The grass felt cold against my face. They didn't listen when I tried to tell them about the flip phone. They just saw a woman whose house was on fire and whose car was exploding. But as they pulled me toward the squad car, Miller pulled up in his moving van. He didn't stop for the police. He drove right onto the sidewalk, blocking their path. Miller didn't jump out with a gun. He jumped out with a tablet. He turned the screen toward the police. It wasn't the bribery tape. It was a live feed from the burner phone I was still clutching. I had accidentally hit the broadcast button on an encrypted app Miller had installed. 3,000 people were watching the live feed of my father admitting he was setting the car on fire to help Silas. The lead officer looked at the screen, then at my father, who was still holding the empty gas can. The police didn't let me go, but they stopped being rough. They took the gas can from my father and put him in handcuffs. Silas, seeing the commotion, tried to run into the woods behind our estate. He thought he could disappear before the digital trail caught up to him, but he forgot who actually owned the property now. The people I sold the house to weren't just Miller's team. I had actually sold the house to a holding company owned by Silas's biggest rival at the firm, a man named Marcus Thorne. Marcus had been waiting at the back of the property with a team of forensic accountants and a private security detail of his own. As Silas ran into the woods, he didn't find an escape route. He ran straight into a wall of flashlights and men in suits who had been looking for a reason to disbar him for 10 years. While the police were processing the scene, Marcus walked over to me. He didn't offer a hand to help me up. He simply handed me a manila envelope. Inside was the proof that Silas had been skimming from the firm's pension fund to pay off my father's old gambling debts. The betrayal went both ways. My father wasn't just being blackmailed, he was being paid to keep me in line. Every time Silas hit me, my father received a bonus in an offshore account. I looked at my father, who was sitting in the back of a squad car. He looked small, like a balloon that had finally lost all its air. He tried to catch my eye, probably to give me one last moral excuse, but the officer rolled up the window. The moral debate was over. I realized that my family hadn't just failed me, they had sold me. I stood there in the driveway of a burning house and realized I was finally the richest person in the family because I was the only one who wasn't owned by a lie. 6 months later, the dust had finally settled, but the legal war was just beginning. I sat in a small apartment far away from the suburbs, listening to the hum of a city that didn't know my name. My mother had been left with nothing. The backup plan she had bragged about was a joint bank account that Silas had drained and moved to a crypto wallet 2 weeks before the fire. She spent her days calling me from blocked numbers, crying about her lost status and blaming me for the fact that she had to shop at a normal grocery store. The court proceedings were a circus. Silas tried to use the security footage of me pacing to prove I was mentally unstable, but Marcus Thorne's team had a countermove. They brought in a digital forensic expert who proved Silas had edited the timestamps on the video to make it look like I was losing my mind. In reality, the footage showed me sitting quietly, clutching a bruised ribs, while Silas stood over me. The jury didn't see a crazy woman. They saw a survivor who had been methodically hunted in her own home. During the cross-examination, Silas finally snapped. He didn't look like the polished lawyer anymore. He screamed that I was nothing without his money and that the house was his temple. The judge had to order the bailiffs to restrain him. It was the same look he had the night he hit me, the look of a man who realized he could no longer control the narrative. I didn't look away. I stared at him until his voice cracked and he was led out in chains. The final blow to their legacy came when the insurance company denied the claim for the house. Because the fire was started by internal negligence and connected to my father's attempted arson of the car, the estate was declared a total loss with zero payout. The land was seized to pay back the victims of Silas's pension fraud. My mother was officially evicted from her own home a week later. She had to move into a one-bedroom apartment funded by a state assistance program she used to make fun of. Just when I thought it was over, I received a package in the mail with no return address. It was a heavy, padded envelope. Inside was a small gold key and a handwritten note on a scrap of legal pad. It said, "The basement safe survived the heat. I guess some things are built to last." It was Miller's handwriting. I realized that while the house burned, the reinforced safe behind the water heater, the one Silas thought only he could open, was still there, buried under the ash. I drove back to the ruins of the estate one last time. The smell of charred wood was still heavy in the air. I walked past the yellow caution tape and stood over the spot where the basement used to be. I hired a private salvage crew to dig. When they pulled the safe out, it was scorched black, but the lock still turned. Inside wasn't just jewelry. It was a second ledger, the one Silas used to track his actual clients. Some of the names in that book belonged to the very judges and politicians who were currently presiding over his case. I had a choice. I could use this book to burn the whole city down, or I could use it to ensure Silas and my father never saw the sun as free men again. I didn't want revenge. I wanted peace. I took the ledger to the Marcus Thorne's rival, a federal prosecutor who couldn't be bought. I didn't ask for money. I only asked for a permanent restraining order and a signed guarantee that my name would be scrubbed from every public record associated with the Sterlings. As I walked away from the prosecutor's office, I saw my father's lawyer waiting in the lobby. He tried to approach me, probably to beg for a deal, but I didn't even slow down. I realized that for my entire life, I had been a character in their story. I was the dutiful daughter or the loyal wife. But as the elevator doors closed, I looked at my reflection. I didn't recognize the woman in the glass, and for the first time, that felt like a good thing. I sold the contents of the safe, the diamonds, the gold watches, the heirlooms that felt like lead around my neck, to an anonymous buyer in New York. I used the money to set up a trust for women who were trying to leave situations exactly like mine. I named the foundation the Open Gate. Every time a woman used that money to change her locks or hire a lawyer, I felt like a piece of my own soul was being put back together. The final news report aired on a rainy Tuesday. Silas and my father were sentenced to 20 years each. My mother refused to visit them. She was too busy trying to sell her remaining designer handbags to pay for her cable bill. I turned off the TV and looked out the window of my new home. It wasn't a mansion. It was a small cottage by the coast with mismatched furniture and a garden that needed a lot of work. But it was mine. I walked down to the beach and took the gold key out of my pocket. I didn't need it anymore. The safe was empty, and the secrets were out. I threw the key as far as I could into the gray Atlantic waves. I didn't just sell a house. I sold a nightmare. I walked back towards my cottage, and for the first time in 10 years, I didn't check the shadows. The air was cold, but I was finally warm.